Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about Blood Meridian, and the video that I made a year ago now. It's been forever. Easily, it's the largest and most successful video I've ever made, at least at this point. Right now I think it's sitting at 112,000 views, which compared to my, I think my second place video has 4,000 or 5,000 or something like that, is incredible. And no doubt many people found my channel from Blood Meridian. And so I thought I'd just go and kind of talk about some comments. I do want to answer some comments, but I also want to talk about some things that I got wrong and things that I would change about the video, or even just kind of my changing perspective on McCarthy as I've read through his work and gone even farther than the articles that I mention in the video and the videos. There is a couple things that I think it's important to mention up front. One, things that have come out about McCarthy regarding Augusta Britt is an important thing. We need to talk about that, if just briefly. It seems, based on a article in Vanity Fair, which has had a ton of criticism placed on it for various reasons, but it seems that McCarthy was in a relationship with a 16-year-old girl, at least, or at most 16-year-old girl, when he was around 30-40 years old. Of course, that is awful. There is a very strange kind of zeitgeist around this article if you dive deep into it. And we should never really put up authors as people as heroes. You should never meet your heroes, but especially in this case, it's really important to have a stance on what happened, and we will eventually learn more once McCarthy's letters release this year. I believe they are releasing very soon, and I'm sure there will be more of Augusta Britt in them, even in her underage state. And I'm not looking forward to that because it's going to be gross and disgusting, but it seems that, at least if Augusta Britt is to be believed, that McCarthy met her at a pool or a hotel or somewhere, which she's not telling us correctly, talked to her when he was very old and she was very young. Again, she says she was 16, but it's kind of iffy whether that is true or not. And he said he took her away from her situation, which was allegedly a poor one in a foster home, and had a romantic and sexual relationship with her. There are some people, if you dive into these comments, who think that because McCarthy may have taken her to a place where that would not have been illegal, that is okay. Additionally, they will mention that they think him improving her life situation makes it more okay too. And I really need to stand out against this. It seems that she was abused earlier in her life as well. But here's the thing. You can help someone without making yourself the new center of their life. It is your responsibility to know that. Again, you can help someone without making yourself the new center of their life. And that is the kind of help Augusta Britt deserved. And from every perspective I look at, it is not the help she got. The progression of this may make this kind of perspective incorrect, but as the situation is now with the information I have, that is the perspective. So I'm going to talk about McCarthy's work. I'm going to talk about him as an author. I'm going to say kind of impressive things that he's done. But that's my stance on the person that he was. And we have to grapple with that. We can't kind of remake history just because we like someone's texts. I think Truman Capote, which I made a video about after mine of McCarthy, is a good example too. He was not a good person, and I say as much in the video, but he was a brilliant writer, and I think the same applies to McCarthy. Okay, let's move on. Let's go to the video that I made. It was really fun. Mostly because I just love Southern Gothicism. That's probably the English literature that I have the most experience with as a critic and as a writer. And I made a very rhetorically forward video. I criticized the Vile Eye, which is another creator on this platform or at YouTube if this ends up in a different place. And that their analysis that the judge specifically was a representation of the Christian devil. And a lot of people really didn't like the way I disagreed or I put down the Vile Eye. And they're right. I think I just need to come out and say that they are correct. I think the video would have been better if I didn't mention any other YouTubers, or I only mentioned ones that I thought did it well. Because I put down the interpretation that it's the devil from the Vile Eye, and I put up the Night Does Not End's channel, which is Dr. Aaron Gwyn. He's a professor of English literature. His channel on McCarthy. His channel is also called something else different now. I'll try and put it in the description so we have that. And then I mentioned Mountains of Books' channel, which is another excellent resource that I have. And I should have just done that. The Vile Eyes video is fine. It's good. And even though I watched it and was disappointed with its conclusions, does not mean that it deserves to be derided. There are a couple things that made it a little worse, mostly clumsy wording on my part, and I don't mean to run away from the subject. I was putting down of his work as well, but also there's a section where I say the words, things affect people regardless of their full understanding of them. And I place that sentence, if you were to just stop right there in that sentence, it sounds like I'm applying that to the Vile Eye, when in reality, my intention was to talk about McCarthy. And if you finish the sentence, then I do finish it by saying that we don't know how much McCarthy knew about Gnosticism or the symbols that he used. But because it's so close to the other ones, it really does sound like I'm really saying he's stupid or terrible, which is not something that I think at all. In fact, I think he got the interpretation that he did from John Sepik, who is the author of Notes on Blood Meridian. And he's written a whole bunch of things, and he's a good scholar. You know, this is a scholar. But I made the video because I think that, one, Mundik and Dougherty have a better understanding of the novel. And two, I don't think Sepik believes that the judge is the devil, even though he mentions something like that in his text. I actually have the book, Notes on Blood Meridian, right next to me. And I thought a little bit about quoting it, but I don't think I'm going to do that. What I am going to do is kind of paraphrase it and say what I think John Sepik wants to do. So John Sepik is a scholar of McCarthy, and he really, really focuses on the historical and literary history that led up to Blood Meridian. It's brilliant. It's great. And the most famous essay out of this collection of essays is an essay called The Judge's, let me just look it up really quick. I believe it's called The Judge's Gunpowder. Yes, The Judge's Gunpowder. Anyway, it's a whole chapter on how that segment where the judge makes gunpowder from the sulfuric land of the Badlands and urine and all of that to fight back against the Indians, and compares it to Satan making gunpowder in Milton's Paradise Lost. And he's right. It's very obviously from that text. But he doesn't stop there in the essay. In the same one, he goes on to talk about Goethe and Faust, which is the kind of legend that Goethe used to write his play of Dr. Faustus, or Dr. Faust, making a deal with Mephistopheles, which is a demon. And he also says that it's very similar to that, and he especially points to the scene where the kid is offering to purchase, or the judge is offering to purchase the kid's gun for some ridiculous amount of money. It's like 27 grand in today's money. And he's saying, like, And he compares that deal that the kid did not make with the deal that Faust makes with Mephistopheles. So regardless of whether or not you think John Sepik is valid, which I do, he is not someone I would point to as to say that the judge is literally the devil. Okay, I'm going to get into a couple comments, but I'll come back slightly to this later, again, why I think the judge specifically is more of a deific figure than devil one. But here we go. This is some comments I'm bringing up. Let's start with the things that I really got wrong. I'm only human, and one of them is, the quote at 8 minutes 24 seconds is one I give of the judge's description. It's actually not from Blood Meridian, even though that's where I source it to, and this is why you put page numbers on things, and I did not do that for this quote. It's actually from Chamberlain's My Confession, which is the main historical basis for Blood Meridian. Actually, I think John Sepik is one of the first scholars to write about Chamberlain's My Confession and connect it to Blood Meridian so closely. Anyway, that is an incorrect citation from me, and that is in the corrections tab in the description section. So I apologize for that. That is just bad writing on my part. Here we go. At Dragonborn7273 said, "Sorry, the useless static made this too annoying to finish. Your video is often clear and loud enough to hear, but with the static you dial your audio down to amplify the static, but make me constantly change the volume." And yeah, I'm sorry about that. I really wanted a way to auditorily tell the difference between a quote and something that I was saying. And so that is just kind of how I decided to do it for that video, but it makes very clear, multiple people said this, that the static was very annoying for some people. I don't do that anymore. Now I just say where it's coming from, or I just let it not be an audio issue. So I'm sorry about that, but hey, I learned from it. And that's always good. At Southstar44 said, "Another film adaptation. You mean someone made a movie out of this story? I thought nobody had done it yet." I replied to this comment, but it's just clumsy wording on my part. There is no film adaptation of Blood Meridian out. There's apparently one coming in the future, but I have not looked too far into it. One of the most interesting comment threads on my video is one talking about who would be a good director to direct the Blood Meridian video, or whether or not it should be in animation as opposed to real life, which is something I've kind of seen floating around too, and not something I have any idea how to input into. I mean, I don't know directors very well, or movies for that matter, but I will probably see a Blood Meridian film if it ever comes out. Just to say that I've seen it. I mean, I have a YouTube channel that talks about it, so perhaps that's something I could talk about in the future if it ever comes. As long as you guys know that I am not really a movie guy and am much more of a book guy. At KenDog said, "Need to dust that table. Great video and very helpful. Thank you." Thank you. And you are also correct. I looked back onto that video and, oh man, I cringed so hard at how dusty that table is with all of my books on it. In fact, I found it so horrible that in some strange pseudo-syncratic fix, I dusted it off in my 2 videos after that, just to be like, look, I do clean my shelves. I do, I promise, just not that time. I don't know. But yeah, it's clean now. At Stephen Yoanawiak 1982 said, "Holy balls, the depth of this analysis is unreal. I commend you. But do you ever think to yourself while you're reading, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and just enjoy the visceral reactions one gets from reading a very entertaining book?" This is a really good question. I think a lot of internet discourse on close readings of books, a lot of people throw around the word anti-intellectualism or like TikTok reading or something like that. And I think that doesn't do justice to how good of a question this is. Do I ever read a book and just say, a cigar is a cigar? And the answer is yes, of course I do. the issue is that when I'm reading something, when I'm interacting with a piece of literature, and I see that the author has made allusions to other pieces of literature, then I am already programmed to enter a mode where I'm reading to try and find those things. And once I start looking for those things as literary icons, so like let's say Chamberlain's My Confession in Blood Meridian, then I also look for it in other literature and other storytelling. So I start looking at things like the Bible, like Paradise Lost, like Gnostic belief, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I find them. Gives me an incredibly close relationship with the book, and that's the value of the thing. Now, of course, many authors don't write it like this. I answered this comment, and I pointed to people like Barbara Kingsolver or Edith Wharton, or pretty much any action series in modern day, and they do not include these specific allusions, at least not in any cohesive way. And so I do read those, and I love them. They're beautiful things. Edith Wharton's ghost stories are some of the most atmospheric things ever, even if they don't have that huge literary or symbolic history behind them. So I guess the answer is, how do I decide? Well, I read them, and I try and understand where the author is coming from. And if the author is coming from a place of literary history or symbolic history or storytelling history and theory, then I'll read it in a symbolic way. And if they're trying to titillate my emotions, then I will read it that way. And both are valid. Most of the time, I do think that one is more valid than the other in talking about certain books, but both are valid in different contexts, for sure. Okay, let's talk about some that talk about the judge as the devil or other things. Kaiga Hug Z said, meh, in literature many things can be true, especially when discussing McCarthy. This is not really something I can answer. It's just kind of a non-statement, like saying, hey, this could be something else, or it could not be, or it could. And so I will answer in the affirmative. Yes, many things can be true. I specifically think this one is, which is why I made the video. At Griffin VB said, the judge is America. This is also a really, it's not really explained in this quotation of this person, although I do think that they wrote a little bit more. I don't have it up on my screen right now. And it's an interesting interpretation. When I'm reading scholarship on Blood Meridian, I don't really find the kind of idea that the judge is a representation of America itself. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that issues with Americanization or American ideals are often combined with colonialist issues. And of course, colonialism is much, much older than America is, making those two things kind of intractable. Like they're together. You can't really separate them. And so saying that he's America is like saying he's Britain or he's, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. There's so much that can be said about colonialism, and that is not limited to America. With the idea that he could be some kind of representation of American idealism, I also find to be less interesting or less convincing, simply because I think McCarthy has already done this, and I find characters like Anton Chigurh to be much more connected to American idealism than the judge ever was. The judge is, to me, very, very supernaturally old. It's something that he combines so many characteristics of things that are older than America that I have trouble kind of isolating him towards the American idea. Even though Blood Meridian is definitely an American novel, I don't think that the judge is an American character. Ian Smith 9125 said, I think if war is God and man is born for it, then the judge is the intermediary, the conduit. I'm not going to answer every single one of these interpretations of the judge. Obviously, there are a ton, and that was excellent. Like, if I could produce a video and have that many people say what they thought about a book, I would consider my YouTube channel a success. So many people just talking about books and their ideas of it. And that's great. I want that to continue. So I'm not going to put this one down or say that I disagree in that way because it's kind of vague, but I will interact with it. So if war is God and man is born for it, then the judge is the intermediary, the conduit. So the judge being the intermediary between man and war. It's a very textual understanding. I think that war, in the context the judge uses it, is sort of a more expansive than just wars for war's sake. Like, he's saying that war came before man and waited for it, but other things were there too. Like, he's using war as an idea, as an example of what he's talking about. And I do not think that just saying that the judge is war, or that the judge primarily exists to connect men to war, is very accurate, because I think it's very limiting on the scope of a potentially incredibly large character. This unnamed commenter said, "The Gnostic elements seem disparate and forced. Anything even related to Gnosticism seems more like a vague reference that the reader is imprinting on the text, instead of any actual Gnostic themes existing in the book." I completely disagree with this one. I guess I said I wasn't going to be too disagreeing, but specifically Jacob Boehm's prelude and the mention of the Ogdoad is really, really convincing to me. Like, that's not disparate. That's not a forced reading. The Ogdoad is a very Gnostic idea. It doesn't seem like at all like a vague reference. And then all of these kind of parables that the judges used doesn't seem to me to be forced either. And it's worth noting that the reason I believe this is not because I read Blood Meridian and was like, oh, that's a Gnostic thing. I didn't know about anything about Gnosticism. So what I did is I read scholars' opinions and I decided which ones seemed the most likely to me. And that's kind of the essence of critique here. That's why I made the video, so that I could kind of share what I discovered through reading different scholars' interpretations. And if you're saying that anything related to Gnosticism seems forced, you're saying that both Mundick and Dougherty, who are really well-respected McCarthy scholars, disagree or are using forced or disparate reasoning. Perhaps you think that, and you have read their articles and understand that, but I tend to doubt it. Their articles are very convincing. Additionally, many other scholars believe them to be true besides Dougherty and Mundick. So let's just talk about a couple other scholars. There's the author of The Night Does Not End, Dr. Aaron Gwyn, and he published a Gnosticism in McCarthy's Literature to his Substack right after the Augusta Britt article was released. And he actually made it free because he was very upset with his image of McCarthy after this. And I think that's a noble thing, to make your literature on something that you're struggling with free, so that way people don't have to kind of struggle along with you. That's I'm impressed that he did that. That must have been very difficult, especially when a large part of your online identity is made up of McCarthy. So you should go read that. But he also, as a scholar of McCarthy, is very interested in Gnosticism and sees it throughout his work. It's a really good essay. You should read it. Dr. Amy Hungerford of Yale has probably the second best explanation of what the judge is. And she views the judge as a very literary character. So she takes John Sepik's thing of Faust and of the devil in Milton. She takes Moby Dick. She takes, Faulkner. And she especially focuses on the sentence, whatever his antecedents, he was more than their sum, which is a reference to Blood Meridian. And that is convincing to her to say that McCarthy views the judge not as something very specific or controlled, but he is a purely literary figure. So he is, whatever his antecedents, whatever Moby Dick, the devil, whatever else, he is more than that because he was built on top of the literary corpses of those symbols. And that's I think, really good interpretation. In fact, she might have the best. It's pretty close to Dougherty and Mundix, but you should definitely listen to her Yale lecture on the book to have a really good understanding of the judge as a character. But I would still say that I find Gnosticism to be a more powerful idea, and especially my kind of segue into saying that what McCarthy is doing is writing a new evangelion. It's kind of a new good word, bad word, including its own book of Revelation, which explains the ending, why it's so cryptic and strange and kind of prophetic in a way. Obviously, that end part is my own interpretation, and saying that you disagree with me is excellent, and I think you should do that if you do disagree with me. But I do wish, there's a lot of scholars that do agree, at least mostly, and I find them convincing. Anyway, let's move on. Frank PP9IY says, you repeatedly say Gnostic Christianity, but we Christians must emphasize that Gnosticism is anathema to Christianity. It is not Christianity at all. It's an ancient heresy. This is, actually a couple people commented this on my kind of framing of Gnosticism. I think I don't really need to explain how I interact with every single literary symbol, but I think saying that I'm like a historical materialist goes a long way in kind of understanding why I framed it that way. Whether or not I am a Christian does not influence how I must interact and present facts about Christian history, if that makes sense. So the reason we say, or I should say scholars say, that Gnosticism or not ancient Gnostics were Christian is because they would regard themselves as this. You could either say that they were something that launched in the 1st century after the Jesus movement kind of happened, and that is very true. You could also just say, even before that, say something like the Dead Sea Scrolls as opposed to the Nag Hammadi library. They were part of apocalyptic Judaism, apocalyptic messianic Judaism. And so saying that they're not Christian because they don't follow a specific modern interpretation of Christianity or a modern dogma of Christianity does not mean that when we're talking about it in a historical context, we should not call it that. Gnostic Christians saw themselves as part of both messianic apocalyptic Judaism and as part of the Jesus movement. So we should call them Christians in critical interpretations of them. Saying like I can't say Gnostic Christianity because they're not Christian, I mean, someone who believes that Catholics are not Christian could say that, or Mormons, or Jehovah's Witnesses, or Seventh-day Adventists, whatever. Anyone can say, oh, that doesn't follow my interpretation of Christianity or my dogma about what I think the true Christianity is, therefore it should not be called that. Is a very egocentric way of thinking about history and literary interpretation. So that's why I call them Gnostic Christians. All right. At MogMonster87 said, I finished this book around a week ago, and my take from it is that anything is possible in life, and when you take into account the horrid things that happen in the novel, this is actually scary, and maybe the judge embodies this feeling. I'm not gonna... That's a kind of a funny interpretation. I like that, but... the second part says, P.S. Any William Faulkner you would recommend. And oh my goodness, if you want to be my best friend, then asking me to recommend books is the fastest track to that. Of course I have Faulkner to recommend. I don't really have a favorite author, but if I did, it would probably be William Faulkner. The next video, by the way, you guys get a sneak preview of what I'm doing next, is a full analysis of The Sound and the Fury. I'm really excited, although it is going to be really, really complex. So I'm going to have to kind of figure out a way to interact with it in a better way. Anyway, what would I suggest to someone who's trying to get into Faulkner? Always, like most of my suggestions, I'm going to start with short stories. So he has the collected short stories of William Faulkner is a really big tome, but it's a really, really good one. Red Leaves, The Tall Men, A Rose for Emily, Anything from the Town, The Hamlet is excellent. And just being able to kind of get really small tastes of how his literature advanced, especially in how that collection is put together, is incredible. Additionally, he also has a text called The Uncollected Stories of William Faulkner, which are stories that were never really published in the traditional sense, but they have been collected over the years and put into the new text. I love Nympholepsy from that book, mostly because it talks about writing and art in the presence of labor and how working every day is difficult. It's really, really hard. And having art as something you interact with outside of that is a way out. That's a beautiful way to think. He also has, during the later part of his career, some stories about World War II and World War I. And those are also really good. They're not, I think, as powerful as his Southern Gothic stories, but Faulkner is still there, and they're excellent. I won't name any in particular because none of them are really my favorite, but start with his short stories, for sure. Then I would probably suggest going to As I Lay Dying. That is an incredible book, literally life-changing book in my opinion. And I could say that about many, many books, but specifically As I Lay Dying is just such an incredible relic of the human experience. And being able to divide yourself among all of these characters and how different they are must have been so complicated. It's complicated in The Sound and the Fury, which many people regard as his magnum opus, but that book is very dense, and the time jumping makes it difficult for some people to follow along. And As I Lay Dying doesn't really have that. It just has characters. It always tells you what perspective you're in. The chapter headings have the character that is being represented. It's easy to follow, and you just get these incredible frescoes of these different characters' minds. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. After that, I would probably read, you've kind of geared yourself up for this. I think you should read The Sound and the Fury after that, or A Light in August. Both are about the same complexity, in my opinion, and they deal with time. And then you get all of the incredible characterization that you do from The Sound and the Fury, or from As I Lay Dying, and it gets spread out in time as well. You get the fourth dimension in there. Finally, you could read Absalom. I know many people and scholars who think Absalom is his best work. I think it's kind of tough. Harold Bloom has gone back and forth on what he thinks it is, but he mentions Absalom, and A Light in August as in his 2019 book, The American Canon. It doesn't mention The Sound of the Fury, interesting enough. Anyway, that's probably what I would suggest for Faulkner fans. Again, I love Faulkner. I read The Sound and the Fury pretty much every year, and I read As I Lay Dying many times as well. I have a collection of his short stories on my bedside that I just kind of keep there, and whenever I'm not tired enough to fall asleep, I'll read one of those or Joyce Keller Oates' stories. So thank you so much for asking me for book recommendations. That's something I could talk for ages about. Okay. At Splunk Master says, you come off as really pretentious by writing off other creators' interpretations of the judge. They even say as much during their videos as silly, uninformed sentimentalism. Again, I agree. And I think I'm going to end with this one and another one by just reiterating that I do wish I would have not mentioned other creators. As for being pretentious, I mean, I've been called pretentious for various times in my life, and if I stopped doing what I was doing every time someone called me pretentious, I would never get anything done. I love literature, and I love talking about it, and if that makes me pretentious, then so be it. I am at peace with my accusations. but I do wish I would have changed it. I've actually kind of considered going back and editing the video with YouTube's terrible video editor, and taking out any mention of another creator. But I didn't do that. I didn't do that because, well, it's something that I did. It's a mistake that I made, and I'm not going to hide from that. That's something that should still be out there. Additionally, if I did do that, it would make the comments who are criticizing me for that specific aspect look kind of out of place and strange. And I don't think like writing in the corrections section is enough to fix that. So I will let my opinion be out there, and the people who enjoyed my opinion or my interpretation or how I put it out there, and I will let the detractors stay there as well, of course. Okay. The last comment I'm going to talk about today, which is probably my favorite comment on any video I've ever made, at Saeed7099 simply states, long-winded. It's so perfect. It's so great. I am pretty long-winded. I can talk for sure. But all I can say from that is I'm very thankful that I have a platform and a place to talk to people about it, and that even though I am long-winded, I still have you guys, my audience and my friends, who let me talk and then talk back to me. And that really is something special, I think. So thanks. Thanks for finding my channel and interacting with it and commenting on it and telling me where I messed up. I look forward to my next couple videos, especially the Benji section of The Sound and the Fury. It's going to take a lot out of me, but a lot in my life has cleared up a little bit in the past 3 months, and so I should be able to produce something, hopefully, worthy of your respect. Alright, I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.